it's Thursday the 11th of December 2025 and I'd like to welcome you to this month's meeting of Rother District Council's Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Brian Drayson, the Chair of the Committee. The Committee is required to consider 3 applications on the agenda today against national and local planning policies. Where these policies appear to conflict with each other, the members are required to use their individual knowledge and judgment to come to an informed decision for the benefit of Rother District as a whole. It should be noted that the Planning Committee is not a public meeting, but a meeting that the public may attend. Rother District Council has a public speaking scheme which allows members of the public and others to address the committee on a particular application. Full details of the scheme are on the Rother District Council website. Members reminded that after... Oh, no, sorry, we haven't got a training today. We are joined in the chamber today by Mike Hughes, Head of Planning, Matthew Worsley, the Development Manager, Asma Chowdhury, Development Manager, Team Leader, Kirsty Cameron, Senior Legal Advisor, Rosella De Tomaso, Senior Planning Officer, Julie Hollands, the Committee Clerk, and Eleanor Drew, our webcast monitor. Joining us online today, we have a member of the committee, Councillor Vicky Cook, and we also have a ward councillor, Councillor Sue Burton. I've already checked their connection and we can hear them. There's no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so in the event of an alarm, we are all to leave the chamber by the nearest fire exit and reassemble in the front car park. Please, can everyone in the chamber this morning make sure their mobiles are either switched off, I forget every time, switched off or on silent. Thank you. I'd also like to remind those speaking at today's meeting to do so in a clear and loud voice into the microphone in front of them, with any questions or comments directed to me, as I'm in the centre of the chamber. It's not me, the centre of the universe, but if the comments are directed to me, it gets picked up by the microphones. It's not a power trip. And I understand when we come to item 9, the public speaker has lost his voice and may struggle to be heard, but we will give him ample opportunity to make his points. So now on to the agenda. Item 1, do I have your authority to sign the minutes of the meeting of the Planning Committee held on the 9th of October 2025 as a correct record? Thank you. Agenda item 2, apologies for absence and substitutes, please, Julie.
So we have apologies from Councillors Creaser, Ganley and Groner, and Councillor John Barnes is standing in as substitute today for Councillor Groner.
Thank you. Item 3, any additional agenda items?
No, there's none.
And 4, any withdrawn applications?
No, there's none.
Thank you. Item 5, disclosure of interests and dispensations. To receive any disclosures by members of non-disclosable pecuniary interests and other registrable and non-registrable interests in matters on the agenda, the nature of any such interest and details of any dispensations obtained. Councillor McLaren.
Yes, so in relation to item 9, I am a member of Battletown Council. Did you hear that? Very quiet. Okay, in relation to item 9, I am a member of Battletown Council.
Thank you. And Councillor Mrs Vicky Cook.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, also regarding item 9, other registrable interest, I've been advised by the Deputy Monitoring Officer to take no part in the debate and I have to leave the meeting for this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Cook. Councillor McLaren, because of that, I'll have to come back to you because I think you're a member of the Town Council as well. Are you remaining for the...
No, sorry, you need to put your microphone on.
Sorry. Yes, I will follow Councillor Cook to remove myself during that discussion.
Thank you. Any others? No, thank you. Right. Agenda item 6, which is
Chairman,
Yes, Councillor Barnes.
a little puzzled by Butter's ruling. I happen also to be a member of a parish council. We have no application in front of us. I take no part in discussions at that parish council in planning matters for obvious reasons. But if I'm going to be excluded, I might just well express a view there.
I'll come to Julie in a moment, but I think in Councillor McLaren's case, you were a Battletown councillor before you were a Rother district councillor when this matter was discussed.
That's correct. I was not a member of the council at that time.
Julie, you wanted to say something?
Yes, just to clarify, Chair, that both Councillor McLaren and Councillor Cook were at a Battletown Council meeting earlier on this year where this site was discussed and a resolution was made regarding enforcement issues. And so the Deputy Monitoring Officer thought it best that both councillors did not take part in the discussion on this because they were technically potentially predetermined on it.
Thank you. Agenda item 6, local plan update. It's a little bit for me, I'm afraid. At the start of most meetings, I remind everyone that the committee is part of the local planning authority and its decisions must follow both national and local planning rules and policies. National rules come from the government, but local policies are decided by us, the people living in Rother. Our current local plan policies were set out in the Core Strategy 2014 and the Development and Site Allocations Local Plan, known as the DASA, in 2019. But these are both now out of date. While they're still helpful, they don't carry as much weight as they used to. Council officers have been and continue working very hard to create a new local plan with updated policies that will last until 2040. The new local plan must be sent to the government for examination and approved by this time next year. Before that happens, there will be 2 more rounds of public consultations. The first of these, which was approved by the Cabinet on Monday to start in January, is focused on proposed sites for development, or commonly referred to as site allocations. It is very important that not only town and parish councils, but also residents groups, landowners, businesses and individuals share their opinions. Once the plan is approved, it will set out where and what kind of development is to be permitted in Rother. Essentially, we will have agreed what development we find suitable, and it will then make it very difficult to refuse any application that meets our criteria. The out-of-date policies have helped stop unsustainable and unsuitable development, especially in the High Weald National Landscape. Now we have the chance to decide what kind of development is acceptable and where it should go in future. The draft site allocations cover all areas of the district. The largest sites are on the edges of Bexhill, but there are also some sizable sites on the edges of other towns and villages, including in the High Weald, and some sites are in smaller developments that may not have had much new development in the past. Some people might say that no development should ever happen in certain areas, but I would ask them, where are your children or grandchildren going to live and work? There's another important reason for the new local plan. The government has set Rother a housing target of 912 new homes every year. That's every year. Even if we find enough sites for 2027, we need to do the same for 2028 and so on. It is up to us through the local plan to demonstrate the extent to which we can meet this target, and the government will be expecting us to get as close as possible. The government also requires us to have a rolling 5-year supply of deliverable sites against our housing target. This is an ongoing process. Since 90% of Rother is either designated as national landscape or protected habitat sites, and as such not appropriate for unrestricted housing development, I personally think that our target should be reduced by 90%, down to just 91 dwellings a year. Not unsurprisingly, the government don't see it the same way as I do. We hope to be able to negotiate the number down from 912, and the draft local plan, which will be consulted on in January, proposes 495 a year. But that is still much higher than our current average of 215 a year since 2011. Officers have worked hard to put together the proposed site allocations soon to be consulted on, considering things like constraints and availability. However, there is still work to be done, and it is important to understand that nothing is finalised. This will be what it says on the tin, a consultation. Residents and local businesses have valuable knowledge that could help influence the final site allocations. So I urge everyone to share their knowledge and views during the public consultations. I know that Rother District Council will likely be gone by the time the local plan is approved, but whatever comes after will need to ensure that its decisions are justifiable based on the local plan policies as well as national policies. Thank you. Agenda item 7. The planning index, planning applications index. The final page of this report shows the applications that are to be considered by the committee today. We now move on to those applications. For each application, an officer will present the report to the committee, and after any public speaking, members will ask questions they may have of the officer before debating the application. Members will then, in due course, proceed to a vote on any motion put arising from that debate. Sorry. Right, so item 8, application RR 2025-1744 full. It's the East Sussex County Council Highways Department Yard at 4 Elver Way, Bexhill-on-Sea. The proposal is the reuse of an existing vehicle depot as a local authority vehicle depot, including the provision of a new vehicle maintenance workshop, administrative and welfare buildings, operation equipment and parking allocation. And the reason it's before the committee today is it is a Rother District Council application. We have one person registered to speak on this application. Therefore, after the planning officer, Rossella Di Tommaso, has presented her report to the committee, and before members ask questions, we will hear from Mr. Lloyd Exley in support of the application. Right, so the officer will now present her report. If you please, Rossella.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So, Matt, if you can put the site plan on for me, please. Thank you. So, the application concerns the former East Sussex County Council Highways Depot at the end of Elver Way. The site is about 0.4 hectares and is surrounded by the homes in Baxton Drive to the west and south, and the Combe Valley Way to the east, and we have some commercial units on Elver Way itself to the north. The site has been long used for storing and maintaining vehicles, highways vehicles, and the general use is not proposed to change with this application. Rother District Council needs to start a weekly food collection, so waste collection, service from March 2026. To make this possible, the site needs to be redeveloped, and the plans include a new building which will be used for maintaining and storing the waste collection vehicles. The building, Matt, if you can put the position, the proposed site layout. So the building is going to be positioned in a far end corner to the towards Combe Valley Way. It's going to have 4 bays, 3 be used for servicing, for servicing the vehicles. Then we have going north. We'll have a cell containers which be used as a welfare unit for the staff working on site. And following along, if you can zoom again in, there are the car parking spaces which are proposed to be used in connection with the operation on site, and covered cycle parking to the west of the building. there are also some facilities on site for cleaning and refueling those vehicles. There is a footpath going from Baxon Drive and which runs along the western boundary of the site. And the land topography is generally flat, and it starts to where the site is, and then gently starts to slope up towards the commercial units in other way, those existing. So the key point for consideration with this application, obviously, is the principle of the development, its impact on the character appearance of the area, impact on nearby residents, drainage, flood risk, ecology, biodiversity, net gain, and highways and parking arrangements. So in terms of the principle of development, the site obviously is within Bexhill development boundary, where new development is generally supported, and local planning policies do encourage making good use of existing employment sites. And the existing site is in lawful use as a highway depot, which will remain. So therefore, the officer view is that the proposal in principle is supported, subject to all the other material considerations. In terms of character appearance, so it is, if Matt, please, if you can put the long sections and which show the elevation of the building. Sorry. So the building is relatively tall, so it is around 9 meter high to the ridge, 27 meters wide and 22 meters deep. It is large because it's necessary to accommodate the servicing of those large AGV vehicles. They need to be lifted approximately 2 meters off the ground to allow safe clearance and access both above and below the vehicles. Therefore, the height is it reflects this necessity to maintain the vehicles when necessary. It can't be reduced. So obviously we are in a commercial site which is an existing use. The character is already commercial, and there are other large buildings there. And officer thinks that subject a landscaping scheme that can be secured by condition, this will help to soften the visual impact. Also, materials and appropriate colour scheme can be secured by condition, and we can make sure that appropriate materials and colours can be used to minimise the visual impact of the building. Therefore, officer thinks that the building will not unduly conflict with the relevant policies subject to successful discharge of condition. So moving on in terms of the impact on neighbours, so our policy do require that new development does not unreasonably harm the amenities of adjoining properties. So the site is part of a long-established commercial area where residents are generally aware and familiar with the activities associated with this use. Nevertheless, it's very important that we assess and the development and make sure that there are no harmful impact on residential properties. So it is, if we go back to the site plan map, so the building's been positioned in a way that allows for a gap between the properties in Brook House and Baxon Drive, and so it's been positioned right close to Comby Valley Way, so to allow a gap between the properties and the new building. Additionally, there is already some screening provided by existing vegetation, and that can be intensified by a landscaping scheme, which again is we can secure via condition. So we think that the separation, the distance between these and a soft landscaping will mitigate the impact of the building. In terms of noise, the applicant has submitted a noise statement confirming that activities likely to generate noise will be restricted to generally accepted working hours, and environmental health that was consulted on application advised that a condition limiting such activities during specific working hours shall be imposed. Environmental health also suggested in a very latest formal response, which was received on the 4th of December, that a noise management plan should be imposed as well. However, we think that, and this management plan should be reviewed each year or following complaints. We think that the condition we suggested on our recommendation, which is condition 7, is sufficient to control the noise issue related to the development, considering the site context and the measure that the applicant has proposed. The other things to say on this is that obviously this development, currently the site has an unrestricted use, meaning that any use, the commercial use can be operated at any time, basically. However, with this application, this development, there is an opportunity to impose those restrictive conditions in terms of activities to be carried out on site, which gives us more security in terms of protecting the residential amenities of the nearby residents. And also there is to note that no neighbours have submitted any objection on this application. So overall, subject to the implementation of the recommended conditions, officers consider that the development will be acceptable and will not unreasonably harm the amenities of neighbouring properties. In terms of flood risk, moving on to flood risk and drainage, so again, the application provides an opportunity to improve the management of the surface water runoff on site and to also improve the water quality. They provided a comprehensive drainage strategy, and therefore, subject to the implementation of this strategy, officers are the opinion that this is a material improvement compared to the existing situation on site. In terms of ecology, so a preliminary ecology report and a tree report were submitted with the application. Excuse me. The ecology team raised some concerns in terms of achieving the required 10% biodiversity net gain on site, given the constraint on site. However, the design and access statement supported, which was submitted with the application and supported by confirmation from the applicant, explains that the biodiversity net gain can be delivered through the purchase of the necessary units via off-site habitat bank. Given the context of the site, officers consider that this is an appropriate solution, and therefore, subject to the successful discharge of the BNG condition, the approach is acceptable. In terms of the highways and parking, so we saw that the scheme includes 6 parking spaces along with covered cycle storage. East Sussex County Council Highways was consulted on the application and raised no objection. and officers have no reason to take a different view on this. And just to conclude, we say that the development is necessary for the delivery of the new food waste collection service, and officers are the opinion that there are no significant issues that make the development unacceptable or contrary to policies. Therefore, officers recommend to approve subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosella. We now move to the public speaking section of the meeting, and we have Mr. Exley representing the applicant. Thank you, Mr. Exley. You have up to 5 minutes to address the committee. I will interrupt you if you're still speaking at 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to speak. So I'm Lloyd Exley. I'm Development Programme Manager for the Council. I think I've spoken to most of you at some point or another, but I look after all of the Council's development and construction projects. And this site, Sidley Depot at Elver Way, is an incredibly important site for Rother District Council. It's essential to the Council's delivery of statutory waste collection services. So with that in mind, I'd firstly just like to say thank you to Michael, to Matthew, to Rosella and the wider planning team who've worked incredibly hard with us to be able to bring this forward to you with a positive recommendation. A lot of hard work behind the scenes. So waste services for the council and actually also for Wealdon and Hastings under a partnership agreement are delivered by Biffa. And Rother District Council must provide workshop space and facilities for Biffa to be able to maintain and manage parts of the vehicle fleet that they use to deliver waste collection services. That fleet has expanded recently due to the food waste collection requirements, so they've had to take on more vehicles. And that's why this proposal is really essential to the council. There's a direct effect between new statutory duties, more vehicles, the need to provide more space and more facilities. Fortunately, the site at Sidley Depot has been made available to us. From my perspective, certainly, we couldn't ask for a better site. It's within an established industrial and commercial area. The site itself has got a very long history of the same uses. You probably know that it was the Highways Depot for East Sussex County Council. Until just a little bit earlier on in this year, there were actually several vehicle workshops on the site already. Those have now been demolished because they were very dilapidated. We had some security issues. They weren't suitable for the intended use. But again, those buildings were there. The uses were established. And I believe you've probably seen the site. It's just a commercial yard. It's tarmac. It's 100% impermeable. It's the perfect starting point for us. So the proposal is largely for a single workshop building. It is a large building that is dictated by the constraints of the vehicles that Biffa need to work on, as we heard. Very large refuse vehicles potentially having to be lifted and maintained in there. It is worth noting that one building is a quite significant reduction in total floor area from what was there previously. So the amount of building, if that's a thing, has reduced. And there's some minor ancillary features proposed as well. A vehicle washdown space, some office space for Biffa to use, fuel storage, the uses that you would expect to go with that. And as we can see from the officer's report, as we heard from Rosella, there are no policy conflicts here. In fact, in principle, the policies encourage the reuse of this site. And there's no issues raised by consultees that haven't either been addressed or there are planning conditions proposed to make sure that they are addressed and controlled. Conversely, no public comments or objections at all, which I tend to take as being really positive, actually, on this type of application. And we have an officer recommendation to approve. That is subject to really comprehensive conditions, which have been the subject of quite a bit of back and forth to make sure that they're robust, that they do what they need to. So with all of that in mind, I hope that you can accept the officer recommendation that you have before us so that this crucial project can proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Exley. Right, members now may ask questions of the officer. I just remind you it's a question time. We're not starting discussions yet. It's any questions. So please refrain any temptation to express your views and just ask questions. Councillor Mrs Barnes and then Councillor Stanger.
Thank you. The one thing I don't know is how many vehicles will be on site at the same time and what the throughput of vehicles during the day is. So is it going to be a continuous flow, considering that we're not only taking in our own Rother vehicles, but also adjoining councils? I believe that's right. Is it going to be a very busy site during the day? My concern, as I think I voiced at the site meeting, is the impact on the local neighbourhood. But it would be useful to know, is that going to be a continuous day in, day out? It's 24 hours a day, I think. No, it's not quite, but that's not quite right, because I think the actual permission for the site is 24 hours a day. I'm sure it's not going to be, because it's going to be 8 in the morning till 6 in the evening or something. But it's really the impact. I just want to be absolutely sure that the impact that we had of noise and all that sort of thing, beautifully taken care of in the conditions. I mean, that's fine. But that's the one piece of information I would like to know. Are they to be booked in, or is it just going to be they just turn up and get washed?
Thank you. So my understanding is that obviously there'll be around 9 vehicles going in and out, maintained, refueled, and it shouldn't be as intensive or any more intensive, or what it could be. And also now we got those conditions limiting some of the those activities that could be potentially harmful for neighbours, restricted to working hours. So I think that in terms of impact or noise impact, we should it should be fine actually.
Just before I come to you, Councillor Stanger, just to clarify that, so talk about 9 vehicles, I'm thinking they go there at night when they finish their day, they get stored overnight and go out in the morning. They're not coming back with food rubbish, they're coming back when they need to refuel and at the end of the day. So I'm presuming they aren't going, they're just coming probably about twice a day or something when they go out. I don't know, is that right?
I mean, I would have thought so, and because yes, as you're saying, waste is not carried on site. It would depend where they're going as well in terms of distance in the surrounding areas. So they wouldn't come in at the same time. And 9 is not a huge number either for that site, and because you have all the commercial units on above to the north, they are constantly also vehicles are there in and out regularly. It is a commercial site, and I think what I would be most worried about are where the vehicles are being washed or were refueled very early in the morning and disturbing potentially this property in Brook House, and the condition or Buxton Drive, those along where the garden backs into the footpath. But those conditions here make sure that those activities are carried out later on in the day. Also, we got condition to not having any machinery or repair when they're repairing the vehicles. All those things should be taking place indoors and not with the shutter open. So there are measures there that make sure that those activities that can actually create a noise are controlled, they're going in and out of the vehicles, I would be slightly less concerned because it's something that already happens. The noise there, Combi Valley Way, is very noisy already. I don't think that 9 vehicles coming in and out the site can add more to it.
Thank you. Before I come to Councillor Stang and then Mrs. Councillor Cook, Matt wants to say something.
Very briefly, I just want to remind members of the long-established use of this site and the context of the site next to, well, on the site visit, we drove past many commercial units who have vehicles coming and going all day. I think we've heard from Rosella saying that the vehicle movements to this site are going to be somewhat limited. If it wasn't for this application, you know, commercial vehicles could come and go all day. They have in the past. I know Councillor Stanger's going to say something on that in a minute, so I won't steal his thunder. So, thank you.
Councillor Stanger.
I just had a question on, because it's just questions still, jobs benefits. Do we have any direct information of, are they moving staff from other sites? Or it will create some jobs, I hope, will it? Or I think because of it, and it is a planning consideration.
That's actually a very good point. Obviously, I think it's BIF operating the site, so that will, and obviously it's an increased service that the council has to provide and will come with additional jobs. I don't have the exact number, but yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Councillor Mrs. Vicky Cook.
Thank you very much, Chair. If I may, through you, ask Rosella a question regarding item 9 in the report, talking about the surface water drainage. I'm a little bit concerned that washing out food truck, there will be some gunk. I mean, I know when I clean up my own sink at home, there's always gunk in the bottom. No idea where it's come from. But there will be an amount of gunk that will presumably then enter the drainage system and the water table. Will this be monitored and will it be reviewed and adjusted if too much gunk, as it were, is starting to block up the drainage system?
So my understanding is that the drainage strategy is for that specific aspect is all going to go into the foul existing connections there. So there shouldn't be anything going anywhere for the cleaning of the vehicles. So yes, in terms of surface water arising from development, obviously it's already hard standing there. So it's all hard sealed surface and the water can go. There is a little stream on the south of the site where the water discharges into at the moment. The drainage strategy the applicants put on is quite comprehensive. There are already some features there that help towards cleaning water coming from roofs and surface, and there is an attenuation tank that's going to go in to release slowly the runoff of the water into then the stream. So there are measures there to reduce, and I think I've said on a report, sorry, just getting to. Yes, so there'll be the installation of a downstream defender to enhance water quality, use of smart sponges within existing gullies, and retention of what's there already, which are some interceptors. Now, technically, I'm not sure I'll be able to respond to what that is in detail, but that is a strategy that will improve what's there, because at the moment there isn't anything apart from sealed surface.
Okay, thank you.
No worries, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, we're told that the number of buildings will reduce, but the building that is going to be put there is going to be pretty high. Can I ask what the distance is between that building and the nearest house?
Yes. So, it's going to be, there is a plan that we can show, or I can roughly give you an idea anyway. So you have the properties in Brook House. So there is, from the first property, there is a distance of about 20 meters or probably over it to the building. And if you go along Brook House, it'll be over 10 meters to the proposed building. And if you think, so the site is also a little bit above in terms of topography. So you got Brook House on Buxton Drive, which is a slightly lower level than that part of the site, and there is a good buffer between the rear gardens and then the site itself, and then you have some more space between to where the building is proposed. So it's 20 meters, there is that distance from number 1, Brook House, to the building, which is about 20 meters. Thanks, Matt, where Matt is pointing at the moment.
Thank you. It's Councillor Mear, then Councillor Gray. Councillor Mear.
Yes, I have 2 questions, one of which might really be for legal. In fact, I was going to pick up on Councillor John Barnes's point. Can we see that cross-section that you showed earlier, please?
Sure. It's coming. Matt is working. These.
No. Yes. That's what I was asking for. Yes, it looks more than 20 metres. These things can be a little bit deceptive. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the drawing, but it's just hard to interpret for a lay person. I'm a little surprised that there have been no comments from the neighbours, but presumably they saw the pink notice. But of course, we've got no guarantee they will have seen this or the exact distances. So I think we have to take our decision responsibly on that. But that was a question, and you've answered it. The other one was Mr. Exley made a point of how important this is to Rother, which I can see that it is. But is that a material planning consideration?
You read by main councillor. No, it's not. I made a note here. It doesn't matter how important it is to the council. We're deciding on planning matters. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rosella. Rosella, I'm looking at page 16, the top, point 7.66, where you talk about the trees. I did actually go back after the site visit to have a better look at the trees. You talk about protecting some of the trees. There are about 6, I think, oak trees that kind of go over the borderline of it, which look fairly old, about 80 to 100 years. Are those the ones you're considering for the TPOs? I would think they would be.
Along the boundary, the footpath, you mean?
The boundary towards Buxton Drive.
Towards Buxton, so in the
Yes.
footpath.
Yes, but those big old trees.
I think there is one tree that's proposed to be taken out, and that's on a Combe Valley side because the building is going to go there, but all the other trees aren't proposed to be removed. Yes, no.
Right. And secondly, you talk about planting trees. Well, I had a really close look, and I think the only space really to plant trees is about a 3-metre gap between the oak trees, and then there's a few birch trees. We're looking at the Buxton Drive side. and it's quite a steep bank.
Yes.
I think it would be quite difficult to plant.
Yes,
trees
you're
in.
right.
So
Yeah.
I was wondering whether you would consider something like hawthorn, which is very good for biodiversity, blossom in the spring for bees, berries in the autumn for birds, and also doesn't it doesn't grow too high. So would that be something you could consider?
Yes, so you're right. The space is limited there for planting. However, planting can happen in many ways, and as you say, there are solutions there. So we put the landscaping scheme on for these reasons, but it's up to the applicant then to provide us with information for us to consider on what type of planting, where it's going to be, how it's going to be. And then for us to consider that condition. But ideally, we would like to see a little bit of increase in planting along the footpath and towards the south of the site. No worries.
Just before I come to you, Councillor Stanger, my first question is similar to Councillor Gray's, because in 6.2, where ESCC Ecology refuse it, pending further information, I am confused with the red line and the blue line boundaries. I'm quite happy with it in residential areas. But in this one, they're talking about taking down some dead trees outside the red line, but inside the blue line. And we end up going for off-site habitat units to make up for it. Surely, I thought there was a hierarchy to by a net gain, and we'd rather have it on-site than off-site. So is there a way of getting them to at least look at planting stuff in between the red line and the blue line so that they don't have to go anywhere else?
That's a good point, and we considered that. The only thing is with biodiversity net gain, before granting permission, we need to have some sort of certainty that the 10% can be achieved. And because we haven't had a landscaping scheme in advance, we are unable to understand whether that 10% can be achieved or not. Therefore, we went with the other route and to get certainty, and therefore the off-site purchase of units by a habitat bank is the best option.
Thank you. I'll come back to my one. Councillor Stanger, then Councillor McLaren. Councillor Stanger.
Hello, yeah. Just a question. So, given this, is it classed as essential infrastructure, this kind of site, or how does it be defined? Is there a definite? Should we consider that, or not really? Waste management is not the same, no.
Thank you, Chair. I think, yeah, it's infrastructure, but beyond that, it doesn't have a particular category. So, thank you, Chair.
Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. Just in relation to Councillor Gray's question, can we specifically ask that the purchase of units from a habitat bank is minimised? Can we specifically ask that? So within the requirement to get to the 10%, can we specifically ask that they leave, that they're as creative as possible in minimising the purchase of units off-site?
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm going to give you two answers to that question, Councillor McLaren, if that's okay. And yes and no is exactly right. So the first one is in planning terms, we don't have a policy to say that off-site is not acceptable. And actually, in some cases, off-site, to be honest, can be preferable because, you know, it's the Lawton principles of bigger, better, more joined-up nature can be better. You know, if you have a proper off-site, you know, big area of nature restoration can be much better than a few trees on site. That being said, of course, I understand the benefits to having it on site as well. So in planning terms, no, there's no way that we can do that. We don't have a policy to do that. The second answer is that it is a council-owned application. So as members of the council, if you were to vote for this, there's no harm in the minutes saying that your preference would be that biodiversity off-site is minimised, but you can't instruct that. Thank you, Chair.
Can I come back on that just to say that on-site, notwithstanding the awkwardness of the bank area, it would add to that separation and visuals from the resident side if there were whatever planting can be done. So all I was really asking for was kind of creative moment and backing up what Councillor Gray said about that.
I think the minutes might reflect that in a moment. Councillor Barnes, then I'll come to my one.
I'm in danger of verging on a comment, but it strikes me the British Army always had a preference for the indirect approach. You cannot condition, obviously, biodiversity in quite the same way. But what about a landscaping condition which actually entailed the planting of trees, including some evergreens where screening was, in the winter, was desirable? I would have thought a landscaping condition was possible. Is that so?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the landscaping condition is there, and what we be looking for is exactly what you're suggesting. So plants that have, they grow tall, they're evergreen, and that improve that screening, intensify the screening along the boundaries. Thank you.
So we come to my question now then, which is nicely follows on from screening, which is, I know there's a condition about the materials, but I'm concerned specifically about the colours. And it does talk about we can condition the colours, but there's no colour suggested. I'm not an expert in colours, but I'm sure there are people who could tell you which colour would be better on the site. Looking at the buildings next door, the much paler roof sections make the buildings stand out, whereas if it was a darker roof section, I'm sure it would be less intrusive. So can we do something specifically on the colour of cladding? I think it's well into the future. I mean, they can build the building before they paint it, but it might be even worth even speaking to an expert, because I was reminded on the site visit of the dazzle camouflage that warships used to have, and that possibly a series of blocks of different colours would actually break it up much more than a single colour. So all I would say is, can we condition it somehow that they look at the colour and the officers approve that before we go down it and make a terrible mistake and have it sticking out like a sore thumb. Bear in mind that it's 9 metres high anyway, it is going to stick out, but thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the condition is there in terms of materials, and we can clarify further that colours is a fundamental part of it, and they should be submitting information to show that the colour scheme chosen will soften the visual impact of the building and mitigate against the height. Thank you.
I suppose strangely it might need to be a different colour on the side facing the houses to the side that's facing the road, but that's if we can put that in there. Councillor Stanger. Well, one moment. Any more questions other than, is it comments now or questions? Right, it's open for debate. Go on, Councillor Stanger, fill your boots.
Oh yeah, no, just going to add to what I thought. Yeah, obviously great. It's a great, well needed for the food waste. I used to live very close to the site. It used to be gritting, 24-hour site gritting lorries. So it's very used. Like 24 hours, I was so close to it, you could see it. So, and the lights and the fluorescence and the big yellow truck. So they're not immune to it. Obviously, they've had a bit of quiet since, so they might have got a bit sensitive to noise. But generally, it's always been used for that. And the road next to it is so loud, it's unbelievable. And the benefits of jobs, potentially, and obviously having more stuff near us, and less travelling for the trucks, less emissions. Blah, blah, blah. And I can't see any, and it's only the difference between 6 metres and 9 metres, and they're moving it further away from the houses, so, yeah, I'm in favour, thank you.
That's 33%. Any more questions? Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I think like Councillor Stanger, I'm conscious that there is real planning gain here in terms of bringing an industrial site under control. When the original planning permission was given back in the 70s, very few conditions seem to have been imposed. So the chance to actually impose conditions is a plus. The major disadvantage is one we're all conscious of, which is because these lorries have to be lifted up in the air in order to be cleaned, this building has to be about 2 metres higher than it might otherwise be. It does seem to me that if we get the landscaping and the colour scheme right, we can minimise the impact of that building on Buxton, the nearest house in Buxton Drive. I don't think we can totally eliminate the problem. The gains on noise, lighting are there. I think, frankly, Buxton Drive will benefit from that. So there are pluses as well as minuses. But I think I would ask the officers to take the planting scheme extremely seriously. The landscaping will minimise the impact of that building. It has the added advantage, it may minimise off-site biodiversity as well. But the real reason for doing it is residents' amenity, it seems to me. My one concern, given the drainage, is probably not that modern, is flooding. But I think on balance, the gains are sufficient to outweigh any disadvantage. And I can't believe the flood risk is greater from this use than it was from the previous use. So I'm in favour.
Thank you.
I will second Councillor Stenger if he's prepared to move.
If he were to move it? Okay. Councillor Chantry. Oh, did you move acceptance?
I move acceptance recommendation for approval.
One moment. Sorry, 1 minute.
Subject to conditions.
Yes, we can come to that. I know before we come to that, Mike wanted to say something.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to make 2 quick points, both of which have been identified by Councillors Stanger and Barnes. I think the fact that there is no change of use here and it's an unencumbered use is a really important material consideration. If this was a greenfield site, we might be having a slightly different conversation, I would suggest. In terms of the second comment was that there is some planning benefit here for the residents, as Councillor Barnes sort of said, in terms of drainage, landscaping. There's currently no conditions on noise whatsoever. There will be activity with this use, and Councillor Stang has identified that there was plenty of activity before, but some of the more noisy activities will have a condition on them, so that represents a real planning benefit. In terms of the landscaping, I think the landscaping, just to be clear, and I know this is an experienced committee, members understand this, will not completely screen the building. Of course, you will see the building from Buxton Drive, but it will help ameliorate it in views. I think what I would say is we need to be proportionate in that landscaping scheme. It's not going to be a 15-metre wide buffer of trees, for example, but there is something we can do, and the applicant is here to hear what members have said about that. And I think that it may well be that if that's done well, there may be no need for biodiversity off-site, as Councillor McCarran has identified. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Barnes.
It may be that 1 or 2 of the voluntary groups in Bexhill might be prepared to help with planting trees, which would help the applicant. We can't condition that, but I know there are members present who might take that thought away.
Councillor Mrs Cook.
Thank you very much. Yes, this is a comment again. I'm afraid I'm still a bit concerned about the washing out of food waste trucks. Rosella did mention that it goes into, there's a stream about, and I just need the reassurance that the stream won't be polluted. She talked about attenuation tanks. So I kind of got the impression from that all the water, when the trucks have been wasted, will go into the attenuation tanks, and then will it be filtered before it's seeped into the stream?
Yeah, I'll let Rosella answer.
Thank you, Chair. So there are 2 separate issues there, because you have surface water issue, and then you have the waste, the washing facilities, which they're going to go into the foul connection, like their existing file connections on site, and which is existing. So there is no change there, and the wastewater is not going into the stream. What is going into the stream is the runoff water after it's been treated, and it would be that runoff water coming from the roof of the building. Instead of going around on site, is going to be channeled into the attenuation tank and then released into the below stream. Yeah, they're two separate issues, though, not to be confused. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I do appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at page 19, paragraph 11, right at the bottom, where you mentioned the biodiversity enhancement scheme. I'm just really pleased to see that, Rosella, and the native shrub species planting. And I just want to say that I'm not keen on conifers. I'm sorry, Councillor Barnes, but the only native conifer is a Scots pine, and we know they grow massively high, totally unsuitable for this site. So again, I would say let's look at native species and hawthorn and maybe birches, silver birches. Thank you.
I wasn't necessarily suggesting conifers. There are other things like hollies that are evergreen.
Other trees are available.
Yeah. So it seems to me the important point is some evergreen would help break the shape of the building up.
So the proposal is to grant full permission, subject to the conditions and subject to a couple of our additions to the conditions, which is the landscape plan and what we said about trying to minimise off-site and have stuff on-site. But that landscaping is also partly to shadow or mitigate the building, and so I'm going to stick my one in as well, because there seemed to be an agreement over the colours, and that we definitely, the colours are separately approved to make sure that the building does not stand out. That was proposed by Councillor Stanger, seconded by Councillor Barnes. All those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. Thank you. Well, I'm just thinking, because I think this, bear in mind, I thought that wasn't going to take long, and it took an hour and 5 minutes. I think a 10 minute, it's not a coffee break, it's a 10-minute break. And we'll start again at 11:45, because we obviously have people interested in the next one present. So back at 2:45, please. To the Planning Committee meeting, we're now going to start with agenda item 9, which is application RR 2025-1015P. Application is Fir Tree Cottage, land adjacent to in Netherfield Hill, Battle. The proposal is a variation of conditions imposed by RR 2022-2791P to show existing layout and to include a mobile structure to be used as a temporary day room. It's been called into the committee by one of the ward members, Councillor Field, for the following reasons. 1, extra building leads to extra traffic on this small country lane. 2, further development will increase the density of building on this site in the countryside in the High Weald National Landscape. And 3, the buildings on this site are there subject to a limited 3-year consent. That consent did not allow for an additional building. Councillor Field is unable to attend today to give her reasons in person due to an East Sussex County Council commitment, but her ward colleague, Councillor Burton, will be addressing the committee later. We have one person registered to speak on this application today, and therefore, once the planning officer has presented her report, and before we move to questions, Mr. Bernard Brown will speak to the committee in opposition to the application. Yeah, Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Chair. I'm declaring an interest as a member of Battletown Council, and on the advice of the Deputy Monitoring Officer, I'm going to take no part in the debate and leave the meeting for this item.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. And for
Chair, just to clarify that Councillor Cook has left the meeting, so
That's
she's...
what I was just going to say. I was just going to say, for people, anyone watching, Councillor Mrs Cook has also left the meeting remotely. Thank you. And I believe Councillor Barnes wishes to make a declaration just before we start this.
I think, Chairman, I ought to note that I have known the Speaker for something like 50 years, but he has not been in communication with me on this subject, on this application.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. Right. Luckily, Mrs Barnes has the same friends as Councillor Mr Barnes. So that's the same declaration for Mrs Barnes. Thank you. The officer will now present a report, which is Asma Chowdhury. If you please, Asma.
Hi, good morning. This application seeks to vary an existing permission for 2 Gypsy and Traveller pitches, originally granted in 2022 for a temporary period expiring in May 2027. The proposed variation introduces a day room, commonly referred to as an amenity building, for use in connection with the approved pitches. Its design ensures removability at the end of the temporary permission period. It is important to emphasise that the day room does not constitute an additional pitch. No additional family will occupy the site, and the day room will not include sleeping accommodation. Day rooms or amenity buildings are integral to Gypsy and Traveller life, serving as communal spaces for daily living outside the main caravan, which is primarily used for sleeping. This separation of sleeping accommodation from living facilities, i.e. the kitchen, dining room, living room and bathroom, is a long-established and recognised practice consistent with their traditional and cultural values. It is also important to emphasise this application relates solely to the day room. The principle of the pitches is not for consideration as it is not relevant to the application at hand. The principle has been established under the temporary permission granted in 2022, which continues to govern the outcome of this particular variation application. Overall, the proposed day room is essential for meeting the cultural and practical needs of the families currently occupying the site, and its design ensures that it can be dismantled and removed at the end of the temporary permission period, thereby maintaining compliance with the original consent. In addition, whilst the day room is visible in the street scene, as this is a temporary permission, this impact would be for a limited period, viewed in the context of the existing structures and the adjacent road and dwelling. That being said, its present impact is considered to be adequately mitigated owing to its recessive position away from the road, which combined with the roadside vegetation provides a degree of visual buffer, thus reducing its prominence. In terms of wider landscape, the site is bound by ancient woodland to the west and to the south, screening long-range views into the site. So the development is not considered to affect the wider Highweald national landscape. The impact is limited to the locality, to the immediate area. As such, Officer's recommendation to committee is to grant temporary permission with conditions which include the removal of all existing structures at the end of the temporary period, which remains May 2027. Thank you.
Thank you, Asma. We now move to the public speaking section of the meeting. Mr Brown, address the committee. Thank you, Mr Brown. You will have up to 5 minutes to address the committee, and as with anyone else, I will interrupt you if you are still speaking at 5 minutes. But there'll be a bit of leeway if you're struggling to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Residents did not agree with the last temporary planning consent, but we hope the conditions attached would mitigate our concerns, as zero confidence that this would be the case has proven to be justified. The reasons given in that consent for conditions 2 and 9 were clear and explicit, and nothing has occurred to alter the final and proper decision made by the democratically elected members of this committee. Today's report reconfirms restrictions on the occupants of the site, but no evidence in change of need has been provided. This retrospective application is because the applicant would like an additional day room, which increases the build density of this site by more than 50%. The officer report has construed this like as being essential. Are members now to be advised that the officer reports and decisions of RR 2020-599P and RR 2022-2791P were seriously deficient because day rooms were never mentioned? Members would be well advised to note that the precedent for defending judicial reviews on these matters include the requirement of consistency in planning decisions. In paragraph 714, it states the application follows an enforcement investigation. For the avoidance of doubt, it required concerted pressure by residents to get officers to even visit the site. The officer reported the occupants had agreed to comply with his request to remove the construction because, being in the ancient buffer zone, it was unacceptable. Members, we would contend the construction was unacceptable because, once again, the occupier had not even applied for planning consent. And in fact, it was not removed, it was just relocated 50 metres away. For whatever reason, RDC officers refused to take any steps which would have caused the applicant to cease the construction until a formal application had been made. Other conditions continue to be ignored. Condition 10 states no commercial activity shall take place on the land, but every day for the last 3 months, transit-type pickup trucks, commercial vehicles have been on this site, and as none of the occupants drive these vehicles, it is reasonable to assume either commercial activity is taking place or there are unauthorised occupants. Again, no action has been taken. Members are reminded of this statement by the planning officers. The residential use of the site is not considered suitable on a permanent basis in this location due to the harm it causes to the landscape and scenic beauty of the High Weald National Landscape, but is permitted on a temporary basis due to lack of current provision of G&T sites. It is impossible to deny the blot of the day room adding to this harm. Planning consent should be refused because of the additional harm and because of the specific restrictions of occupancy override the generality of any wish for a day room. It is disingenuous for these points not to have been mentioned in the report, as is also the case that the fact that planning officers are making relative to this site in the new Rother plan. The site is a small part of a much larger parcel of land owned by the occupants, whose history foretells this will only be the start of an expansion of the site. Rightly or wrongly, the residents of the civil parish of Battle feel previous decisions made by you are ignored, overwritten or circumvented by planning officers when it comes to the GT sites in Battle. Consent would ignore local residents, the Rother plan and the Battle neighbourhood plan. Someone has to stand up for them. I think the residents of Battle will be astonished by the exclusion of elected members of Battle from this discussion. Members, it's in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Councillor Burton, one of the ward councillors, is now going to address the committee. Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chair. So, as one of the ward members, a significant number of residents have contacted me, and for the record, the only word I can use is they are very angry that correct and known processes have not been adhered to, and act first, ask later seems to be the way that things have been done. However, the matter in hand is around this permission, and would this council give permission if the application was received prior to any action? I do not believe that it would for the following reasons. The site is already full and complete with living quarters for 2 families, space for a tourer, space for a visiting tourer, cars and numerous outbuildings. The paint colour of the buildings does not comply with the High Weald National Landscape Management Plan, and nor is it included in the Battle Civil Parish Neighbourhood Plan. And finally, we have the Battle Town Council's dark sky policy, and there is a serious risk that this will be not adhered to. The site is in the depths of woodland of the national landscape. So for this reason, I do not support this application and think it should be refused. However, if the committee is minded to support this application, can I propose that it should be for daylight use only? It is in the woods and we need to do everything we can to preserve wildlife and habitats, and unbalancing that by lights at night would be very negative. So I would hope that that could be given serious consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Members may now ask questions of the officer. I'm going to go first because Mr. Brand did make reference to it. I'd like to ask one question at the outset. I'm aware that the local plan consultation that's going out in January raises the possibility of this site becoming a permanent Gypsy and Traveller site. Therefore, I'd like to clarify my thinking with you. I believe that its inclusion in the consultation is not strictly relevant to the application before us this morning. This is for a temporary permission for a day room that will, if granted, be conterminous with the existing temporary permission. Am I correct in my thinking?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is correct. The new local plan has no direct relevance to this application. Thank you.
Thank you. And while I've got the microphone, before I come to you, Councillor Barnes, my question, and picking up a comment from Councillor Burton, because the one thing that struck me on the site visit was the colour of the building, and is there something that can be done by condition to get it to an acceptable colour for the High Weald?
Are we talking about changing the colours of the caravans?
No, they're there and they are the colour that they are, but we're doing the application on the day room, and that's a hideous sort of stain, brown stain. I wonder if we can change that colour by this condition.
Yeah, that's absolutely possible. We can impose a condition to control the colour, the facing colour of the building.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I probably have more than one question, but my first question really relates to what is said in paragraph 713 of the commentary on page 28, which appears to assert that the principle of the use of this site for members of Gypsy and Travellers has already been established. I thought the decision of the committee was that this was contrary to our Gypsy and Traveller policy, our existing one, and that was why we only gave a temporary and personal consent. So it seems to me that paragraph is the reverse of the truth. Am I correct?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so paragraph 713 in the report, where it says we're not seeking to re-establish the principle, it's the temporary principle. So in principle, in granting temporary permission, that's what we're not trying to re-establish, hence why this recommendation is also on a temporary basis to run alongside the temporary permission for the 2 pitches.
Can I suggest that we minute very carefully that this is not about the general principle, I put that very strongly because this site has suddenly bobbed up in the consultation document. I'm told it has not been fully evaluated. It certainly has not been consulted upon. And therefore, this would seem to assume a decision which, frankly, the council has not yet taken.
Thank you. And I'm sure we can't, I'm sure we can't dictate to the officer their report, but if actually the word re and the hyphen were taken out, so it read, it does not seek to establish the principle of, rather than re-establish, and that would cover Councillor Barnes's point that it's not been established as a Gypsum Traveller site, it's a temporary personal permission for those families on that site.
I agree to some extent, but I think what Councillor Barnes is correct. We need to minute this, and it is the issue of currently there is a temporary permission. We are not talking about the long term at this committee. Here and now, we're talking about it being a temporary use. Whether or not it's permanent in the future is for another day. That's a whole point of this new local plan consultation to seek views on this and many other sites. Thank you.
I think Councillor Barnes's comment, my comment and your comment are sufficient to make sure the minutes reflect that concern. Thank you. I'll come back for others 2 and 3 later. Councillor Stanger.
Thank you. A couple of questions. So, given the history, I see from the 2024 application regarding, is it condition for the landscaping? Obviously, the landscaping is still not quite, I don't think there was some of it's not been done. Is there a way of somehow kind of periodic kind of checking that, because we see them empty shoot things and that, didn't we? But it was about...
Can I just say, I don't think that's relevant to this application. It's more a question of enforcement because it's about the whole site and not just the day room. So I take your point, and I think the matter has been followed up. And in fact, deer, it's lovely to live where deer are, but they've also got a taste for the whips that were planted. But you've got another point.
Yeah, just literally, and site visit on Tuesday. I know the unit's been moved away from the ancient woodland, but there's still a few existing structures today. Are they compliant within the ancient woodland buffer zone?
Those structures are historic. They were there before the current occupants.
Yeah, just going by what the objections were, so I was trying to see.
Councillor Mrs Barnes, then Councillor Gray. Councillor Mrs Barnes.
Thank you, Chairman. The first visit to the site was when the caravans, as they were in a different place. But it struck me as we went into the site this time that the buildings, that the living quarters are much larger. It just, the question I would like to ask is there any difference in the size of the older caravans than the ones that are there now? And that's leading me on to say, but if that is so, and if, as I think, the new caravans are much bigger, what is the need for a day room?
Yeah, I was going to say the size of the caravans weren't relevant, but of course you made it relevant by asking, is there a need for a day room? Asma.
Yeah, there is a need for a day room because with each pitch, any Gypsy and Traveller pitch, in addition to the main caravan, you know, when you think of G&T sites, you think of the caravan, but it is more than the caravan, a pitch. It is also the touring caravan, and it is also the day room, commonly referred to as an amenity building. And it also includes parking spaces for minimum of 2 vehicles, as well as a small garden area, sufficient, you know, for play and to dry clothes and, you know, a little shed, etc., things like that. So G&T pitch is not just the caravan, it is more than that, and it includes the day room. So there is a need. And the fact that the 2022 permission was granted, I suppose that when they moved in to the site, they were only just moving into the site. So they weren't really properly established within the site when the original permission was granted, and a day room helps to fully establish the site as a complete pitch.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Oh, thank you, Chair. My point is also to do with landscaping, but could I just mention this to... Can I? Yes, question, yes. Asma, when we visited the site, we saw the boundary fence with the ancient woodland, and you pointed out that they planted all along the boundary fence a row of whips, and we could see the stakes and the protectors. But when I went to look, there was nothing inside. There were no whips. There was one where there was just a branch stuck in, which you just pulled out. There was no roots. So this really worries me, because firstly, when you plant whips, you plant the tree first, and then the stake, and then the surround. So this really bothers me, because I think, why would they do this? And, you know, it comes to a matter of how much confidence we have in them. Did they do this just to fool us? If the whips had been planted and died, we would have seen them. So that does worry me.
I will answer that question, but before I answer that question, no?
Well, because
only insofar
I
as
think it's
to
more an
reiterate
enforcement
that it's
question
not
rather than
relevant to this
relevant to this.
application.
I just feel it's a matter of trust and confidence.
Our enforcement officers had actually visited the site when the landscaping was completed. This was a little while ago, and the enforcement officer observed it and could, at the time, confirmed that the landscaping was completed. When the enforcement officer revisited, the applicant had advised, so we were aware, I wasn't aware, but I came to this on our return from our council site visits, that the enforcement officer had actually visited after the initial landscaping, and the applicant had confirmed that actually everything that they had planted was gone because the deers had been at it. So there's already been discussions, and the enforcement officer is in discussion with the current residents with regards to replanting. So it's not being left to one side, it's not being forgotten. We are pursuing replanting along the boundary, and it's actually in the condition as well, where it states in general that if for any reason the planting dies, it needs to be replanted.
Mike wanted to come in here.
Thanks, Chair. Asma's answered the question. I just wanted to, I suppose, to reiterate 2 points very quickly. One is that it's not of, the enforcement of that is not of direct relevance to this application. The second part of that answer is that for reasons Asma has explained, we will follow up on that in terms of getting the planting, and we've got reasons to believe that will be done. So, as I say, hopefully that gives you an answer to your question with Asma's explanation as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mear.
Yes. I was on the committee back in 2022, and I can't remember. When I say I can't remember, I mean I really can't remember. But perhaps you could inform me. Were we told back then that there would be a need for a day room? Because it might have affected the discussions in the committee. I don't know how or whether. I can't say now.
I will answer that because I was the case officer for that application. I do not recall advising there was a need at that time.
Councillor Sanger, you put your hand up? No. Okay. Councillor Barnes.
Just to confirm, I too was sitting on that debate. I'm sure if you check the record of it, you'll find no mention was made of a day room. No mention actually was made of what a pitch constituted. We were talking mainly about whether it should be 2 years or 3 years, because we had considerable sympathy for the applicant, but we did not want to concede the principle this was a suitable traveller site. It was too far from the facilities, either in Netherfield itself, where the shop and the pub is, or from Battle. And there is no bus service on that road. It's not merely that it's a pretty narrow country road where traffic, frankly, is a bit of a problem, but there is no public transport whatsoever. So the feeling was this was really contrary to our Gypsy and Traveller policy, but we were prepared to make an exception on a temporary basis, given the applicant's personal circumstances. I'm sure that can be validated if you check back to the record.
Thank you. Just, we're still on questions at the moment, and I've got a question for the officer, because we call it a day room in one breath, and then we call it amenities in the other. Day room, as Councillor Burton referred to it, day room creates an idea of something that will only be used in daylight hours. And an amenity building suggests it could be used a lot longer. So are we talking about a building that could be used 24 hours a day, or do we have facility to condition its use to daylight hours?
Day room is just a name, I suppose. It is an amenity building. To condition hours of use of the day room, it would be unreasonable, very unreasonable. This is their home. It'd be like us conditioning limited hours for somebody using their shed or a home office in their garden. It would be incredibly intrusive. It would be unreasonable. So, no, we could not condition how often it is used.
Thank you. So just before I come to Councillor Mears, two other questions come on from that. So are we able to condition external lighting with a view to the dark skies?
Yes, we can.
And I lied, it was only one question. Councillor Mears.
I was going to ask the question about lighting and whether blinds or curtains could be conditioned, also in respect of the lighting.
That one would be a little bit more difficult as well, because it's inside of a home, and how people conduct themselves and live, and when they draw their curtains, that's also quite intrusive. Nobody wants to be told at what time in the evening they should be drawing their curtains. Yeah, not appropriate to condition, I'm afraid.
But I'll just come to you then, Matt. But external lighting is
external
doable.
lighting we can condition.
And I did find my other question is that you mentioned it, but I can't find it in the conditions about no sleeping. I couldn't find it in the conditions. If it's there, I apologise. I've looked again. But if it's there, that's fine. It hasn't got to be added. Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Just on this, just a point of clarification really on the lighting condition. I was going to ask about the difference of internal and external, so that's been sorted. But externally, we are talking about a proposal, a temporary proposal for the day room / amenity building. Are you talking about external lighting on this amenity building, not the wider site, because that was obviously considered at an earlier date?
Yes, we're only talking about this building, so yes, on this building.
So the condition would be worded appropriately, and okay, noted. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to come back because I think Asma's had time to look up my question. Okay. We'll make sure it gets on there. Thank you. About no sleeping in the condition. Councillor Stanger.
Question for Kirsty, if possible, please. Legally, because obviously Gypsy Travellers are protected by the Equality Act, and does the minimum living kind of requirements come into this decision? Because obviously they do, under the Equality Act, I haven't checked that it is covered, that this is part of their culture. So should we consider that, or is that not a planning consideration?
Obviously, you have to look at it as a protected characteristic, but day rooms seem to be an integral part of the Gypsy and Traveller community. I was just trying to look in terms of the original report, whether it was mentioned in that, so I'll come back to you and find out.
Councillor Mrs Mary Barnes.
Well, my question is somewhat similar, but what facilities apply on the day room that they cannot use in their normal own, whatever you call the actual home caravans? And what makes it so important that they cannot have those facilities? You know, for example, cooking, showering, which is, I think, all mentioned in the report. But why can they not do that in these, what I think, aggrandised caravans that they now have? Why should it be different? I mean, has anybody been inside the day room to look at the facilities that are not included in their normal 24-hour residence?
I think that's almost an impossible question to answer in that. Oh yeah, but it's like saying, why do you need a village hall when you can have a meeting in your garden? But Matt, you were going to say something on that. I thought.
I can. Yes, I think. I mean,
I think you were saying officers have been inside.
yes. So our enforcement officer has been inside. Yeah, and it's got. Yeah, there are cooking, washing facilities, etc. Living area, I believe. I was going to go back to the point about this need, or essential need that's been referred to. In the East Sussex Gypsy and Traveller accommodation needs assessment, they do recognise that an average family pitch must be capable of accommodating an amenity building. So that is in the county assessment, and it's recognised there. So for it to come to an application, you don't need to re-demonstrate that it's a requirement because it's recognised there in their guidance.
Yeah, can I just add to what Matt said, which is, I think, a number of points. It's not unusual to have a day room with Gypsy and Traveller accommodation, but it's also, as a committee, it's not for the applicants to justify the need for that any more than it is for an applicant for a residential conservatory extension to justify the need for that. What you've got to do is look at the application in front of you and are the impacts okay or are they not okay? And I would suggest that this, and you will come to your own view, I would suggest that this application turns on the landscape and visual impacts of the proposal. And you'll see that, obviously you've seen the position that officers come to, you will make a judgment on that as a very experienced planning committee, but it's not for the applicant to justify the need for what they're doing here, it's for you to look at the impacts of what's in front of you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mrs Barnes.
But in 2022, we were supposed then, because of the rules and regulations of the Gypsy and Caravan sites in our own manifestos, we were supposed to know that inevitably they would be asking for a day room, but they didn't. If it was so important to them, surely, decent law-abiding applicants, non-applicants, would have actually come up with something which would have indicated that they were going to need a day room because it was important to their way of life. Why didn't they?
I think this was mentioned earlier that we were looking at when they first set up at the site, the applicants, and like anyone, anyone's home, over time you realise different needs, and if you're in a house, you'd extend, you'd have again an outbuilding, a shed, and an amenity building, garage for storage, annex. I don't think, back in the 22 application, we were not talking about a day room because it was not proposed at that time. You know, it's like when we get an application for a housing development, people, you know, developers don't have to say, right, in the future, residents may apply for an extension and an outbuilding, etc. So it wasn't unreasonable for it not to be mentioned in 22. I don't think there was any need for it to be mentioned then because it was not proposed.
My point is, a garage is not immediately part of their way of life or whatever. This is fundamental, apparently, to their way of life. And to restrict them from having it is going to be against all their principles, I've no doubt. But surely common sense in the end says they have got 2 caravans on the site which are perfectly capable of fulfilling all the functions that the day room has. Why can we not just insist that they use those?
Oh, sorry, I thought I'd missed someone. Yes, go ahead.
No, obviously, we have to determine the application in front of us, and so we don't have a crystal ball in terms of what's going to happen in the future. We have to determine the application on its merits at this point of time, not what was done or said in the past, what the application now that's in front of us. So I think it's irrelevant what was said at that time. It is part of the application that is in front of us. We have to determine that.
Councillor Barnes.
Yes, it leads me to a genuine question. I am in some difficulty over this. Are we able and should we be treating this as an application for an extension? I use the analogy of a house. We originally granted a temporary permission for a house. Are we now looking at an application for an extension to that house? And are we entitled, therefore, to refuse it, or are we bound to give it?
Thank you, Chair. You're treating it as a proposed temporary day room. That's what you're treating it as. And you need to look at the merits of the application itself. And as I said before, I would strongly suggest that you steer away from the need argument for the reasons that I gave. You look at the impacts of this temporary development. And, you know, I think that it turns on the impact of the high-wheeled national landscape, of which, you know, there are policies in the neighbourhood plan in terms of the conservation, there are policies in the local plan that you're all familiar with. And there's also Section 85 of the Countryside and Rights of Way Act. But for the reasons that Asma has set out in her report, as officers, we consider that that temporary impact is acceptable, given that it's viewed in the context of 2 existing caravans, it's adjacent to existing hardstanding, etc. Obviously, you will come to your own judgment. Thank you, Chair.
Any more questions? Okay, then the matter is open for discussion. Councillor Stanger.
Just weighing it all up. So I completely understand the unhappiness about retrospective applications. Poor compliance, well, the poor or compliance got there in the end, kind of compliance enforcement. We probably can't enforce stuff. But we have no Gypsy and Traveller sites in 5 years' supply. We have to consider that, and we have Gypsy and Traveller community entitled to live somewhere. And they've been there for 2 years since we've decided the last one. Well, since I've been on the committee, and the local members said it's gone quite okay. So that's where I'm at. It's not ideal, but we are where we are. I think the landscaping could be, if we can do anything with kind of shielding it or colouring it or doing something and making sure that's followed through, that would be great, but I'm not sure that's possible. What's the other thing? They have the basic human right to have something, and if it says within their community that they use these rooms, and I know families from Howsham similar, they do have these rooms and they are necessary. If you had a large multi-dimensional family home with multi-different brothers, sisters, kids you would have a communal area. I'm not saying it's the same, but that's in my mind where I'm at anyway. So yeah, and it is still only temporary. Condition 1 says it has to be removed in May 2027, and condition 11 conditions the size. I'd like to be stronger landscaping and checks, but I don't think that's possible. But I'd be willing to move officer's recommendation.
Yeah, I'll come back to you on that because we're still discussing it. I was just going to mention, because I know the Battle Town Council objection included this, and you just touched on it. I think that the fact that all 3 applications on this site have been retrospective, as frustrating as it may be, retrospective applications are allowed, and they are quite justified, and they cover people who've not known or forgotten so I don't think we can assign anything negative to the fact it's a retrospective. Enforcement is different. This is an application for this particular room. The only thing I would query what you said there, Councillor Stanger, is I'm still not convinced it fits into the definition of a Gypsy and Traveller site. You referred to it. It is a site that's being used by Gypsy and Traveller families, and it's got temporary permission, and this is looking for temporary permission for that room. It's not established, and that was Councillor Barnes's point before. It is not specifically a Gypsy and Traveller site. It is a site for these 2 families who happen to be from the Gypsy and Traveller community. Councillor Barnes, you were going to come in and shoot me down, probably.
No, I repeat really what I said in 2024. If you study our current Gypsy and Traveller policy, we have no new local plan at the moment, and so the old plan and the DASA are slightly out of date, not entirely our fault. The government keeps changing the targets. But given that policy and the neighbourhood plan have weight. How much weight is for us to decide what we accord? When you look at our existing Gypsy and Traveller policy, it's about access to facilities and public transport, and we have decided more than once as a committee on sites put forward for Gypsy and Traveller use, which were actually closer to facilities than this one. So I think it's very important that we adhere to the notion that what we're discussing today is not a Gypsy and Traveller site, but a temporary permission for a Gypsy and Traveller to occupy. And I think that actually needs to be minuted very carefully indeed and be part of our decision. I lived in a mobile while I was converting my barn with Mary. These are not traditional Gypsy caravans. They are, in fact, mobile homes. I'm bound to say I don't really see the need in a temporary site for additional accommodation. It may be that this is a cultural norm which we have to respect. What worries me about this, and I am worried about the fact that each time we have to jockey the applicant by enforcement procedures, it's not retrospective by accident. On each occasion, no action would have been taken to go for a retrospective planning application if we had not been considering enforcement. That doesn't give you much confidence that if we put conditions on, that they're going to be adhered to. And I think the law of the land allows you to take into account the past record. I know we can't use precedent, but where in fact behaviour has inspired a lack of confidence, I think we are entitled to take that into account. That said, I'm very even, Stephen, what I don't want to do is to encourage the applicant, sorry, a very important point. What I don't want to do by anything we do today is to encourage the applicant to think that we will extend the temporary permission. That will be to give them false hope, and I don't think they should entertain false hopes. I haven't made up my mind which way to vote yet, but I have to say that that's a very important consideration given past conduct.
Thank you. Okay. Kirsty's just looking something up to come back on that. Any other comments? I take. I mean, I was just going to say. I take the point about that. I still would like, if we end up granting this, to specifically do something about the colour to fit in with the national landscape, even to give them 6 months to do it because the winter's coming. But
yeah, no, I mean, let me say at once, I think the temporary permission we gave, in retrospect, I voted for 2 years, not 3, was disastrous. When I go onto that site and look at the way those mobile homes don't fit into the landscape, it makes me realise just how important it was that we didn't give sufficient weight, frankly, either to the ancient woodland or to the AMB. We are where we are, as Councillor Stanger says. We gave that temporary permission. We gave it for a year longer than I would have given it, but that's what we did. But if you want to have a candid assessment of the impact on the AMB of the buildings that are now there, they could not be said by any means to either conserve or enhance the historic landscape. They are visible from a public footpath. There is a right to roam in those ancient woodlands. Therefore, they do have visual impact on actual users of the High Weald. And it seems to me that in allowing those colours and those designs, we breach both the letter and the spirit of the High Weald Management Plan. I know the High Weald Management Plan is not a specific planning consideration, but the High Weald is ours to safeguard, and we have not safeguarded it.
And I concur with the previous application, but that doesn't mean to say we can't try with this one to get the colour better. Kirsty, have you found your answer?
Sorry, I just wanted to check on something. So obviously the conduct of an applicant isn't a planning consideration. I just wanted to check if there was a technical consultation in the May of this year in terms of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. I just wanted to check if that applied to that, but that was the power to decline to determine applications in cases of earlier non-implementation, so it doesn't relate to this, but obviously the conduct of an applicant isn't a material consideration. And as the officers have said, retrospective applications that are, we have to determine them in the same way we would any other application, as frustrating as it may be. It's done on its merits. Thank you.
Councillor Mear.
Well, yes, I make my usual declaration that I'm an ex officio member of this committee and therefore can't vote. I also didn't go on the site visit on Tuesday, but I've been twice before, so I do know the site. It is frustrating to be faced with planning permission by incremental degrees, but I will be advised by officers, no doubt, that I have to consider what I have in front of me. I can't say what would have happened if I'd known this a few years ago. I can only decide or speak about what I see today. And on the basis of what I see today, I think that I would have had to have voted for this in favour of the application. I don't think the additional harm that there may be, visual harm, is significant in any way at all. Bearing in mind that this is, as Councillor John Barnes says, a temporary permission. It is only temporary. It is only another building on a larger site. And putting it all in the balance, if we have people living in these conditions, I would much rather that people were well housed and able to live life decently and fully, and hopefully be good members of society, who can be clean, well-fed, socialised, like everybody, as we should for anybody on any application. We should want that for the people living in Rother. And so I would, on balance, have voted in favour of this.
Thank you, Councillor Mear. Any other comments? Councillor Stanger.
And I just, like going on balance, I concur a lot with Councillor Mear, Councillor Barnes on some of the things, but on balance, I will move motion to accept a grant temporary planning permission for this day.
Thank you. Is that seconded by anyone? Well, I'll second it. So we can... So I'm assuming, Councillor Stanger, and I shouldn't assume it, but that includes the no sleeping.
If you can obviously delegate to officers, if we can enhance any landscaping, colouring and
Colour,
restrictions.
External lighting and non-sleeping.
Obviously delegated to officers.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Right. All those in favour of granting temporary permission with those improved conditions, please show. That's 2-4. Those against? That's 4. That is lost. Thank you. We now need to firm up those reasons for refusal. I know some of it came out in the discussions, but what have we, sorry. So, in fact, it's my own notes here. If it's rejecting the officers, I've got to invite, for a start, Mike to comment about that, the effects of that negative one. But I think we can also go to a vote to refuse it with reasons. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I will say a few words, if that's okay. I think that officers need to be very clear on what grounds you're refusing this application. We need to be very clear on that. I assume, based on the discussions, it's around the impact on the High Weald national landscape, and I see some nods. But I would also just like to add that I think, and this is my professional judgment and colleagues, that I think our chances of success on low, chances of success at appeal are low, given that it's a temporary permission, given the things that we've talked about. So whilst chances of success on appeal aren't a material consideration, they are part of the context in which you're making a judgment. So I will just offer that comment, but yes, as officers, we need to be very clear on the harm that you are identifying that justifies the refusal of temporary planning permission. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Barnes.
Jim, we've not yet framed a motion. We have simply refused a motion which I thought was far too widely drawn. I do take the point that we ought to have something which is viable at appeal. And I think any motion needs to recognise that what is in front of us intensifies the harm to the High Weald national landscape, and therefore does not conform to the requirements of the Act, which I would remind you was passed in between the original granting of temporary planning permission and the current one. That's quite an important consideration because our duties have been strengthened since the original grant of planning permission. I think where we go from there, whether we actually refuse or whether we make quite plain that there will be no extension of time on the entire site, I think we've got to say something reassuring to Battle and recognising the force of the neighbourhood plan and our own Gypsy and Traveller plan. And I think all of that means that we've got to say that in no circumstances under current policy should this be a permanent site. Given that, there should be no contemplation of any extension to the existing temporary provision, but we recognise that a pitch embodies the use of a day facility and subject to the appropriate conditions which we've identified, reluctantly we will grant that.
Sorry, you lost me there. Do you want to say something, Mike? Oh, Mike. Matt first, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Barnes. We need to consider what's in front of us. And it wouldn't be right to vote today that we will not grant an extension. Again, I think that's for a future date. The local plan consultation is out for comments, and if members of the public and members
if you are determined actually not to provide context in a motion, I cannot vote for it.
Okay. The consultation will allow members and the public to comment on the permanent allocation of the site. Today, we are talking about a temporary permission. It can't be in the motion, in my view.
We are talking about confidence of the public in the planning system. I cannot vote for a motion that doesn't recognise that there are proper concerns being expressed by the public and by members. And if that's not in the motion, I cannot vote for it.
Chair.
I was going to say, I don't see how that can be in the motion when the motion itself was clearly temporary. The conditions are temporary, tying it to May 27. There were additional things to try and reduce the impact and harm to the High Weald National Landscape. I'm not sure we can put anything in there that doesn't apply to anything that's been asked. And we're not being asked to consider today whether it becomes a permanent Gypsy and Traveller site. We are only being asked to approve a day room with the conditions we've mentioned on a temporary basis to run with the temporary permission that exists already. So I don't see that we can phrase that any other way to grant it with any other conditions on it other than the conditions that are in there. We can refuse it because of it intensifies the harm to the High Weald National Landscape, as you made that point. And it's possible that the colours and the lighting and stuff, conditions don't mitigate that. But I don't think we can vote on something that isn't there and we can't create it as a discussion on permanent sites. That's my view, but
I think, Chairman, my problem is that an Act of Parliament has been passed since we granted the original permission. This is not rebus sic sanctibus. Circumstances have changed.
I'm at risk of repeating myself, but I appreciate the amendment to legislation, and it does strengthen our position, our duty to conserve and enhance. However, we're talking about a temporary permission today. The permanent allocation of this site is for consideration under the new local plan. If there are objections to that, we raise them then. I think already in the questions and discussions between, well, I commented, you questioned, Councillor Drayson added in, it will be minuted probably more than once that we have clarified today is purely temporary. The long-term permanent allocation of this site is not for consideration now. You know, deciding on a temporary permission, if you grant it, if you don't, it has no bearing on whether it is a permanent site. That is going to be minuted, and if that gives any reassurance, I don't know if that assists. The officer chair would like to add something as well.
Asma.
Councillor Barnes, I understand you're wanting us to impose a condition restricting no further applications in the future. As Matt has explained, that we just cannot do that. But if I may instead reiterate the conditions that were imposed on the original permission, and again in this, the use hereby permitted shall be discontinued and the caravans and day room removed from the site before 30 May 2027. And the reason given for that is explicit. The residential use of the site is not considered suitable on a permanent basis in this location due to the harm it causes to the landscape and scenic beauty of the High Weald. And it goes on. And then the other condition, which is condition 8, where it stipulates the use hereby permitted shall be occupied by the named applicants. It continues on to say when the site ceases to be occupied, ... the all caravans, day room structures, materials and equipment brought onto the site needs to be taken away and the site restored. So whilst we can't impose a condition restricting no future applications on this site, there are conditions in place that seeks to restore the land to its former condition.
Can I just add something, and I'll try and be short, because I think we need to go back to the motion. I think that as we've heard some public concerns, there's some objections in the report. Mr. Brown has spoken about it, some members have as well, so that is understood. We cannot do anything that would fetter our decision making in any future applications should they come forward. And that's the same for any application. So to do that would be very ill-advised, I would suggest, notwithstanding the concerns that have been said. We determine applications on the merits. So this is a temporary permission for a day room, and that is what we're voting on effectively. And if any future applications come in the future, we will determine them on their merits as they stand at the time, as we would do with any application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. One moment while I talk to Kirsty. I was right. We either need now a motion specifically refusing it with reasons, or a different motion which leads to accepting the officer's recommendations. So does anyone want to propose a motion to refuse? No, we've had a motion to accept the officer's recommendation. That was rejected. So we would either need to definitely refuse it now with specific reasons for refusing it, or there is a way of another motion that would in effect accept the officer's recommendation, but with stronger terms, conditions in it. Am I right in thinking that?
I think what I was looking for, and I'm listening to Mike Hughes very carefully, is a strongly worded motion. I accept we can't bind ourselves for the future, but I think what we do need to realise is that this intensifies the existing damage to the AONB, that nevertheless, because a definition of a pitch includes a day room, we cannot refuse it, but we would reiterate the condition laid on the last one, which Asma has just read out, and reaffirm that that condition needs to be adhered to. Is that an acceptable wording which gets our feelings across?
I'm just playing with that wording now. Councillor Stanger.
Is there any way that we could add something to the motion or something in a condition that in May 27, if we're here, or any future decisions would have to come back to committee? I don't know. I'm just trying to put an extra safeguard in place to be able to reassure members that we will have another say if it comes to us again. But that was all I would do. I understand the concerns, but I think that the condition 1 covers the removal very strongly. Condition 11 covers the size. And because I don't think we can strengthen that anymore. But obviously, if there was something else that could reassure members within the main recommendation, I'd be happy to propose.
Thank you, Councillor Stanger. In terms of any future application coming back to committee, I think given the history of the site, it would be coming here anyway. However, we have attached advisory notes to permissions on previous sites, saying, in this case, it would be in granting temporary permission. Any future application, if the planning committee requested future applications come back to committee.
I hate to be, I'm not singling out the individuals or the applicants because that's not the idea. I was just trying to provide reassurance to the committee members that would be minded maybe to. Kirsty, do you have any?
I'm just mindful of the fact that in terms of devolution and what role the planning committee will have at that point in time, and kind of what call-in procedures would be available to members, so it would be difficult to put it as a condition that potentially it could be unenforceable.
So I'm still trying to write an acceptable wording at the moment. Go on, I'm still trying to listen to the Councillor Gray.
Matt, can we also say no more retrospective applications? We can't say that.
No.
It's just so
No, we haven't got control over that. I was going to just follow on from my comment on the advisory note as opposed to condition. And also, Councillor Barnes's comments about, my understanding is it's a very much more on balance view that you're taking, and reference to landscape impact.
Yes, I think what I was trying to capture is we're not accepting the officer's recommendation as quite as bland as it is. What we're trying to say is we think this does intensify harm to the AONB. Nevertheless, because of the status of a day room on a pitch, we cannot refuse, and therefore consent will be given on a temporary basis. The other thing I would want is to, and I think in the motion it's worth drawing attention to condition 1 in the original permission, which should be restated as a condition for this motion.
If not, the tape will have done. And I'll be looking at it again this afternoon. Just bear with me a couple of minutes while Kirsty and I whisper again for a bit about my wording with Mike. Apparently not with me. Right. I've got to read my own scribble now, which is always a bit dangerous. But if you could just do this one, listen to this one carefully, obviously change it if you want. But, so I've got, the committee considers that the harm caused to the high-wheeled national landscape by the granting of the previous temporary permission will be intensified by granting this application. Nevertheless, in recognition of the temporary permission already in existence for the site, we grant temporary permission for the day room as per the officer's recommendation with the additional conditions suggested. Hang on. I've got to give John Barnes time. He's looking to the heavens to check out the rooms I did, the words I did. No, it's not. It's not semantics. Words are important, and I say every time John sends me a letter, I have to get a dictionary out. I mean, words are very important, and this is not semantics. This is saying we recognise when we said yes to the two caravans, we knew there was going to be harm to the to the high-wheeled national landscape, but because of the particular conditions for this family, this site, these people, we said yes. Now we're being asked to further damage or harm the national landscape. But in between times, we've had a law that says, actually, you've got to do more than just look after it. You've got to actively preserve it. So it's more than semantics. It's recognising we've already said once, yes, we accept the damage. And on this occasion, I mean, you might not accept this, but I'm saying we still recognise that this is going to cause even more damage. But because of the temporary nature of this site, we will live with it, we'll grant it to May 2027, when the whole site should be cleared.
What I was trying to grasp in my motion was the reason why we're giving it, which is that the day room was implicit in the original temporary permission because it's part of a definition of a pitch. And then I think you and I are on all fours again, but I wanted specific reference to the original condition 1 in the motion, saying that this should be reiterated along with other conditions in this current grant.
They will be reiterated.
Yeah, it will be, but I think we want to say that very firmly in the motion and not merely accept an officer recommendation. In other words, we are stressing that that condition is vital. There must be a form of words which we can just give a little more of our reasoning and convey a degree of reluctance. Otherwise, you force us to refuse.
Can I just check what you were saying there is you want to re-emphasise the condition one about the temporary and it's May 27th?
What I want to say in the motion is that we reiterate that the original condition one to the planning permission should be restated as a condition along with other conditions in this grant of planning permission.
Thank you.
I was going to say, and sorry, it's taken me so long to get there, Councillor Barnes, I apologise. Absolutely, that can be in the motion because it will absolutely be in the decision notice if you vote to grant approval. So it took me a while, but I got there. So I think Councillor Barnes will probably read out in a second an amended motion, given what you've just said, because that doesn't change what we're presenting to you. So I understand the point. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Barnes.
Just a thought. We've refused it, but the building is still there. And that is the great, that's the reason that so many people are up in arms. It is still there. What's going to happen to it?
We haven't refused it yet. We've not accepted the officer's recommendation. We would now need a motion to either say we refuse it on following grounds, and then it would be a matter for enforcement and the planning officers if we said no. Obviously subject to an appeal and etc. One moment, I'll be back in the room in a minute.
It remains to be seen, Chairman, of course, whether my motion will find a seconder.
I shall say this only once. No, okay. I'll say it slowly and clearly so that you can get the wording. Obviously subject to amendment, but I'll propose this one myself, save anyone else doing it. So the motion is, the committee considers that the harm caused to the High Weald National Landscape by granting temporary permission under RR 2022-2791P will be intensified by granting this application. However, in recognition of the particular circumstances in granting that temporary permission, we grant this temporary permission for the day room as per the officer's recommendation, with the additional conditions as discussed, and a clear restatement of condition 1 relating to the use of the whole site being discontinued and the caravans and day room being removed on or before the 30th of May 2027.
I'll second you, Councillor Grayson.
Nobody wants to talk, right, but we'll go straight to the vote on that one. I suppose to be technically correct, I've got to read it again. So the motion before you is that the committee considers that the harm caused to the High Weald National Landscape by granting temporary permission under RR 2022-2791P will be intensified by granting this application. However, in recognition of the particular circumstances in granting that temporary permission, we grant this temporary permission for the day room as per the officer's recommendation, with the additional conditions as discussed, and a clear restatement of condition 1 relating to the use of the whole site being discontinued and the caravans and day room being removed on or before the 30th of May 2027. All those in favour, please show. 3. All those against? Those abstaining? 3 abstentions. So that is carried. Thank you. Right. I'm sorry. Oh, yes. If Councillor McLaren's not left. Okay. Thank you. I'm just going to go and speak to Julie at the door, which is why I'm not in the seat. Right. Welcome back to Councillor McLaren. I don't think Councillor Mrs Cook was coming back because I think she had another commitment. So we're now on to agenda item 10, which is RR 2025-1481P. And that's at Crossways, Smugglers Way, Fairlight. And the proposal is an infill extension with changes to existing fenestration and internal alterations. The reason it's before us today is it's a councillor application. The officer is Maria Taylor, but she isn't coming. Matt's going to present the report. And the recommendation is it be resolved to grant full planning permission. There's no one registered to speak. Therefore, once the planning officer's report will be presented, as being presented to the committee, we can ask questions of the officer before we begin our deliberations. Matt, please.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to a site in the village of Fairlight. It's within the development boundary, outside of the High Weald National Landscape. It lies to the east side of Smugglers Way, as shown on the site plan. I will zoom in for you. The property is a single-storey bungalow. It's got reasonable sized front garden with driveway. The proposal is to infill the front section. So you can see there's a bit of an indent there, and it will make it rectangular in shape. For you on the screen is aerial photography showing the surroundings. You've got residential properties to the north, east, south, and on the opposite side of the road to the west, with the proposal being on the front elevation. It's well away from neighbouring properties, so no impact on them. The plan before you shows where the proposal is going. So on the front elevation, I will just bring up the pointer to laser pointer. So yeah, where the laser is circling, that is where the infill is. The elevation below shows the proposed flat roof design, but it is contained between the two pitched roof projections at the front. From either side elevation, you cannot see. In front of you is a photograph of the front elevation, again showing one of the pitched roof projections, and this is from the road. From an officer's perspective, it's a very small scale development. It complies with our local plan policies, subservient to the existing property, appropriate materials are used, and there will be no impact on neighbouring properties. The recommendation is to approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions for the officer? Councillor Barnes.
Move approval.
Move for approval by Councillor Barnes, seconded by Councillor Stanger. So its motion is to approve and grant full planning permission. All those in favour, please show. That is carried unanimously. Thank you. I thought it was going to last longer, which is why I put a cough sweetener. It won't. Agenda item 11. For members to note that the next scheduled meeting of the Planning Committee is on Thursday the 15th of January, starting at 9:30, with any necessary site visits arranged for Tuesday the 13th of January, again starting at 9:30. That brings us to the end of this month's Planning Committee, so I'd like to thank everyone for their contributions and take this opportunity, I think it's all right on the 11th of December, to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Hasn't it come around quickly? And thank you very much. Goodbye and see you next year. Thank you.